The afternoon sun poured through the tall windows of Celestine's, casting golden rectangles across the polished hardwood floor. James Parker wiped down the marble counter for what felt like the 100th time that day. His boss, Mr. Chen, was a stickler for spotless surfaces. "Smudges tell customers we don't care," Mr. Chen always said. "No smudges at Celestine's." James nodded to himself as he worked. At 25, with 5 years at this upscale restaurant, he knew every corner of the place. He could recite the wine list backwards, recommend the perfect dish for any taste, and handle even the pickiest customers with a smile that never revealed his true feelings. But today, that smile was harder to maintain. The letter had arrived that morning, another reminder about his student loans. The numbers danced in his head as he cleaned. $87,000 and growing. His dream of becoming a doctor seemed to fade a little more each month. And then there was Mom. Her arthritis was getting worse, and the medicine costs kept climbing. James glanced at his watch. He promised to call the pharmacy during his break to see if they could work out a payment plan. Earth to James. The voice of Lily, the hostess, pulled him from his thoughts. Her eyebrows were raised, and she gave a slight tilt of her head toward the entrance. Table 7, VIP. James straightened up immediately. In restaurant code, that meant someone important had arrived, maybe a food critic or a local celebrity. VIPs meant better tips, and better tips meant a few more dollars toward Mom's medicine. "Got it," he said, tucking his cleaning cloth into his apron pocket and smoothing his black tie. He crossed the restaurant floor with practiced ease, weaving between tables where business people made deals over lunch and couples leaned in close over shared desserts. Table 7 was in the corner, the best spot in the house, partly hidden by a decorative screen and with a view of both the city park and the open kitchen. As he approached, James saw a woman in her 40s with perfectly styled hair and a gray suit that probably cost more than his monthly rent. Her face seemed familiar, the kind you might see on business magazines or TV interviews. Beside her was a teenage girl in a wheelchair, her body turned at angles that suggested cerebral palsy. But what caught James's attention were her eyes, bright, alert, taking in everything. "Good evening," James said with his professional smile. "Welcome to Celestine's." The woman looked up, her gaze sharp and assessing. Up close, James recognized her. Elaine Winters, the tech company owner whose face appeared on billboards downtown. Her company made special computers for people with disabilities, worth billions if the news was right. "Thank you," she replied with a brief nod. Then with a softer voice, she added, "This is my daughter, Sophie." The girl in the wheelchair looked up at James and made a sound, not quite words, but clearly a greeting. Her hand moved in what might have been a small wave, though the movement wasn't fully controlled. James bent slightly to meet Sophie's eyes directly. "It's a real pleasure to meet you, Sophie," he said, his voice warm and genuine. "First time at Celestine's?" Sophie made another sound and nodded, a small smile forming. "Well then, we've got to make sure it's special," James said. He pulled out the chair across from Sophie to make room for the wheelchair, then handed them both menus. "Our chef just added a new pasta dish with truffles that's amazing. And the view from this table is the best in the house. You can see the fountain in the park when they turn the lights on at sunset." Elaine Winters looked slightly surprised at James's direct interaction with her daughter. "Sophie loves pasta," she said, her businesslike tone softening just a touch. "Perfect. Would you like to hear about our specials?" James asked, looking between them both. When Sophie made an enthusiastic sound, he continued, "Today we have." As he described the dishes, James noticed how Sophie's eyes lit up at certain foods. He made mental notes. She seemed excited about the chocolate dessert, less so about the fish. Most people didn't bother to read these small signals, but years of waiting tables had taught James that the real conversation often happened without words. Little did he know that this ordinary start to a shift would become the moment his life changed forever. As dinner progressed, James kept a watchful eye on table 7 while serving his other customers. The tech billionaire, Ms. Winters, seemed different from what he'd expected. There was no loud talking on her phone, no demands for special treatment. Instead, she spoke softly to her daughter, occasionally glancing at important-looking emails on her phone. James brought their main courses, the pasta special for Sophie and grilled salmon for her mother. He placed the dishes carefully, making sure everything was within comfortable reach. "Would you like freshly ground pepper?" he asked. "Yes, please," Ms. Winters replied, then turned as her phone buzzed with yet another message. She frowned at the screen. "I'm so sorry, Sophie. It's the HomCom team again. I have to take this." She looked at James apologetically. "Our new product launch is tomorrow. It's been chaos." Sophie nodded like she was used to these interruptions. Ms. Winters answered the call and stepped away from the table, walking toward the restaurant entrance where it was quieter. James noticed Sophie eyeing her pasta hungrily. She tried to pick up her fork, but her hand trembled, making the utensil wobble between her fingers. The fork slipped, clattering against the plate. She tried again, her face tightening with concentration. Again, the fork tumbled from her grip. James pretended not to notice her struggle as he refilled her water glass. He'd learned from his cousin who had cerebral palsy that most people didn't want others staring while they attempted everyday tasks. But when Sophie tried a third time and let out a small sigh of frustration, he made a decision. He approached her side of the table. "Would you like some help?" he asked quietly, his voice casual, as if he was offering more bread or water. Sophie looked up, her eyes searching his face for any sign of pity. Finding none, she nodded with a small smile of relief. "My mom usually helps when we eat out," she explained, her words coming slowly but clearly. "But she's busy a lot." James pulled up a chair beside her, turning slightly so she couldn't be seen by other diners if that might embarrass her. "My cousin Tommy has CP too," he said conversationally as he twisted some pasta onto the fork. "He taught me a few tricks." Sophie's eyebrows rose. "You know about CP?" "Cerebral palsy." "Yeah. I was in medical school for a while before I had to take a break," James explained, holding the fork so she could take a bite. "Tommy was a big reason I wanted to be a doctor, actually." As Sophie chewed, her eyes lit up. "This pasta is amazing," she said. "So what happened with medical school?" James helped her with another bite before answering. "Life happened. My mom got sick, money got tight." He shrugged. "I'll go back someday." "You should," Sophie said firmly. "You'd be a good doctor." James laughed. "You've known me for all of 15 minutes. "I'm a good judge of people," she replied with surprising confidence for someone so young. "Most people talk to me like I'm 5 years old or completely deaf, or they only talk to my mom like I'm not even there." James nodded, understanding. He'd seen people do the same to his cousin. So he said, changing the subject as he helped her with another bite. "I heard you telling your mom earlier that you like movies. What kind?" Sophie's whole face brightened. "Everything by director Akira Kurosawa. Have you seen Seven Samurai?" James nearly dropped the fork in surprise. "You're into Kurosawa? That's serious cinema." "Just because my body doesn't work right doesn't mean my brain doesn't," Sophie said with a grin. "I watch movies all the time. Can't play sports, so I became a film expert instead." For the next 20 minutes, as James helped Sophie eat, they debated the merits of different film scores and directors. He discovered she had strong opinions about everything from classic westerns to modern sci-fi. "The score in The Empire Strikes Back is clearly superior to A New Hope," Sophie insisted. "The Imperial March alone makes it better." "No way," James countered, cutting her dessert into smaller pieces. "The original theme when Luke looks at the twin suns. Iconic. Nothing beats that moment." They were so engrossed in their debate that neither noticed Elaine Winters standing outside the restaurant window, her business call forgotten, watching them with tears gathering in her eyes. Elaine stood outside the restaurant, her phone pressed to her ear, but her eyes were fixed on the scene through the window. The business call that had seemed so urgent moments ago now faded to background noise as she watched her daughter with the waiter. Over the years, Elaine had seen every possible reaction to Sophie. There were the people who stared too long, their eyes filled with unwanted pity. There were those who looked away quickly, uncomfortable with difference. Some spoke too loudly, as if Sophie's physical challenges meant she couldn't hear properly. Others addressed only Elaine, acting as if Sophie wasn't even there. After 15 years of this, Elaine had built walls around them both. In her world of board meetings and billion-dollar deals, she'd learned to keep Sophie protected from those stares and whispers. Sometimes she wondered if the walls had grown too high. "Ms. Winters? Are you still there?" The voice on the phone pulled at her attention. "I'll call you back," Elaine said, ending the call without waiting for a reply. She stayed outside, watching. Inside, James had pulled up a chair beside Sophie. His movements were natural, not stiff with awkwardness like most people. He held a fork with just the right grip, helping Sophie take a bite of her pasta, but he wasn't making a big show of it. Most importantly, he was talking and listening, really listening, to what Sophie was saying. Elaine moved closer to the window, careful to stay out of sight. She could see Sophie's face now, animated and bright. Her daughter was laughing at something James had said. It wasn't the polite laugh Sophie used when adults made corny jokes trying to connect with her. It was her real laugh, the one that came from her belly and lit up her whole face. James was cutting Sophie's dessert now, a chocolate cake that looked too rich to finish. But instead of taking over completely, he was showing Sophie how to press down on the fork with the side of her hand, using a technique Elaine had never seen before. When Sophie managed to get a bite by herself, James gave her a high five as if they'd just won a game together. A couple walked past Elaine, giving her curious looks as she stood staring through the window. She didn't care. For the first time in maybe years, she was seeing her daughter through fresh eyes. Sophie had once told her, "Mom, the worst thing isn't when people are mean. It's when they act like I'm not really there." Elaine had filed away the comment, promising herself to find better therapists, better schools, better everything. But watching James with Sophie, she realized that maybe what her daughter needed most wasn't another specialist, but simply people who saw her as a person first. Through the glass, Elaine could see James leaning in, listening intently as Sophie spoke with effort about something. Most people rushed Sophie or finished her sentences. James waited, nodding occasionally, his face showing he was genuinely interested. When Sophie finally got her thought out, James threw his head back in laughter. Whatever Sophie had said must have been funny, really funny, and clever. Elaine pressed her hand against the cool glass. When was the last time someone outside their family had seen Sophie's wit? Her sharp mind? Her passion for music and movies? In the busy world of raising a child with special needs, between therapy appointments and doctor visits and accessibility fights with schools, had Elaine herself forgotten to see these things? James was clearing the plates now, but still talking with Sophie. From his animated gestures, they seemed to be debating something. Sophie was shaking her head, a stubborn look on her face that Elaine knew well. Whatever they were discussing, Sophie wasn't backing down. And James wasn't treating her like a child to be humored. He was engaging with her ideas, challenging her thoughts. Elaine took a deep breath and stepped away from the window. It was time to go back inside. But something had shifted within her, something important. In this simple restaurant moment, a waiter had unknowingly shown her a new way to see her own daughter, and perhaps a new path forward for them both. That night, after they got home, Elaine helped Sophie get ready for bed. Their penthouse apartment took up the entire top floor of the building, with floor-to-ceiling windows that showed the city lights spread out below them like fallen stars. Despite all this space, they mostly lived in just a few rooms, the ones made specially for Sophie's needs. He was nice, wasn't he? Sophie said as Elaine helped her change into her pajamas. Her words came out slower than her thoughts, but Elaine had long ago learned to wait. The waiter? Yes, he was, Elaine replied, pulling the soft cotton shirt over Sophie's head. His name is James, Sophie reminded her. And he didn't treat me like I was broken, Mom. The words hit Elaine like a punch to the stomach. She busied herself with arranging Sophie's pillows, not wanting her daughter to see her face. No, he didn't, she finally said. After tucking Sophie in and making sure her water and emergency button were within reach, Elaine kissed her goodnight. Sleep well, sweetheart. Mom? Sophie called as Elaine reached the door. I liked feeling normal tonight. Long after Sophie had fallen asleep, those words kept echoing in Elaine's mind. She sat in her home office, a room with 3 computer screens and a view of the park where they sometimes took weekend walks. The city twinkled below, busy even at this late hour. On her desk sat a thick folder. Her assistant, Raj, had worked fast. He always did when Elaine said something was important. Inside the folder was everything she could possibly want to know about James Parker. Elaine flipped through the pages slowly. 25 years old. Graduated top of his class from State University with a degree in biology. Accepted to medical school 3 years ago. Completed 1 year with excellent grades. then took a temporary leave of absence. Started working at Celestine's around the same time. There were copies of newspaper clippings showing a younger James volunteering at free health clinics in poor neighborhoods. A recommendation letter from a professor called him the most naturally gifted student I've encountered in 30 years of teaching. His medical school application essay spoke about growing up with a cousin who had Down syndrome and how that had shaped his interest in becoming a doctor. Further in the folder were the financial records, student loans piling up, a mother with chronic health problems and mounting medical bills, a small apartment in a part of town where the rent was cheaper but the crime rates higher, hours cut at his second job at a convenience store when the owner hit hard times. Elaine leaned back in her chair, rubbing her tired eyes. She thought about the way James had spoken directly to Sophie, not through her. The way he'd helped without making Sophie feel helpless. The natural kindness that couldn't be faked. She'd built her company, Winter Tech Solutions, from nothing 10 years ago. After Sophie's diagnosis, she'd noticed how poorly designed most technology was for people with physical challenges. Her first product had been a computer interface Sophie could use easily. Now her company made tools used by millions of people with disabilities around the world. Elaine got up and walked to the window, looking out at the city. She'd made billions by seeing potential where others saw problems, by understanding needs that most people overlooked, by noticing what was missing in the world. Tonight, watching James with Sophie, she'd seen something else that was missing, not just in Sophie's life, but perhaps in the world of medicine. Doctors who truly saw the person, not just the condition. Medical professionals who understood dignity was as important as treatment. Her Winter Foundation gave scholarships every year, millions of dollars to promising students, but they were usually carefully planned programs, designed by committees and announced at fancy fundraising events. What she was considering now was different, personal. A single life that might touch countless others if given the chance. Elaine returned to her desk and picked up her phone. Even at this hour, she knew Raj would answer. "I need to set up a meeting," she said when he picked up. "And I need to create a new scholarship program." Tonight, 2 days later, James arrived at Celestine's for his afternoon shift. He'd been up late the night before, studying old medical textbooks he couldn't bear to sell. Sometimes he still pretended he was just taking a break from medical school, that he'd go back soon. But the truth sat heavy in his bank account. Another year of payments had gone by, and he was no closer to returning. "James, can you come to the office?" Mr. Chen called out as soon as James walked through the employee entrance. His boss's face gave nothing away, but James felt a cold knot form in his stomach. Had he done something wrong? He mentally reviewed his last few shifts but couldn't think of any complaints. "Right away, sir," James replied, hanging up his jacket. The manager's office was small but neat, with awards and photos covering one wall. James had only been called in here twice before, once when he was hired, and once when he'd received Employee of the Month. He knocked on the door, then froze when it opened. Sitting in the chair across from Mr. Chen's desk was the woman from 2 nights ago. Elaine Winters, the tech billionaire. She was dressed in a simple blue blazer today, her hair pulled back. She looked both powerful and somehow more approachable than she had at dinner. "Ms. Winters," James said, confused. "Is everything all right? Was there a problem with your meal?" Mr. Chen stood up. "I'll give you two some privacy," he said, nodding respectfully to Elaine before leaving the office. James stood awkwardly by the door, unsure if he should sit. "Please," Elaine gestured to the empty chair, "have a seat." James sat down, his hands folded in his lap. Was this about Sophie? Had he done something wrong when helping her? "Sophie hasn't stopped talking about you," Elaine began. Her voice was warm, different from the businesslike tone she'd used at the restaurant. "But that's not why I'm here." James waited, still uncertain. "I've been doing some research," she continued. "You were in medical school. Top of your class, it seems." James felt heat rise to his face. "How did you?" "I make it my business to know things," Elaine said with a small smile. "My company employs thousands of people. I learn about them before I make decisions." A heavy silence hung between them. James couldn't imagine why this wealthy, powerful woman would be looking into his background. "Why did you leave medical school?" she asked directly. James hesitated. He told this story so many times it had become almost rehearsed: financial reasons, family obligations, planning to go back someday. But something in Elaine Winter's direct gaze made him tell the truth. "My mom got sick," he said simply. "She needs special medications. Insurance only covers part of it. And my loans." He trailed off, shaking his head. "I couldn't do both. I thought it would be temporary, but—" He gestured vaguely, indicating the restaurant uniform he wore. Elaine nodded slowly. "And if those obstacles were removed, would you go back?" James laughed without humor. "In a heartbeat, but that's not going to happen unless I win the lottery." "I'm not offering you the lottery," Elaine said, leaning forward. "I'm offering you something better." She explained her proposition. The Winter Foundation would fully fund the remainder of his medical education, not just tuition, but living expenses, books, everything he needed. And they would provide medical coverage for his mother through their employee health plan. "In return," she continued, "after you graduate, you would work for 3 years at medical centers we support, facilities that specialize in treating patients with disabilities and chronic conditions." James stared at her, waiting for the catch. "Why would you do this? You don't even know me." "I know what I saw," Elaine replied. "I watched you with Sophie. In 15 years, I've never seen someone treat her the way you did, with respect, with patience, without pity. That's not something you can teach in medical school." She leaned back in her chair. "This isn't charity, James. It's an investment. The world needs doctors who see people first, not their conditions. Sophie spotted that in you immediately. I trust her judgment." James was stunned. Words failed him completely. "Say you'll finish what you started," Elaine said, her voice softer now. "And said you'll join us for dinner next week. Sophie is quite insistent about that part." James looked at her, this woman who had the power to change his entire life with a single decision. He thought about his mother, about his abandoned dreams, about Sophie's bright eyes when she thanked him. "Yes," he said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. "Yes to both." The seasons changed. Leaves fell and bloomed again. Snow covered the city and melted away. 3 years passed like the turning pages of a book, each one filled with new challenges and victories for James. His return to medical school wasn't easy. That first day back, he'd sat in the lecture hall, feeling older than his classmates who hadn't had their dreams interrupted. But when the professor began speaking about neurological disorders, James found himself leaning forward, taking notes so fast his hand cramped. By the end of that first week, it felt like he'd never left. On Sundays, when most students were sleeping in or studying at coffee shops, James visited the Winters' home. At first, these visits had been awkward. He felt out of place in their luxurious penthouse with its perfect view and expensive furniture. But Sophie had a way of making everyone feel comfortable. She'd show him her latest art projects or challenge him to video game matches that she usually won. "You're letting me win," she accused him once, her eyes narrowing as her character crossed the finish line first. "I'm really not," James laughed, showing her his controller. "My thumbs just don't move as fast as yours." Over time, these visits became the highlight of his week. Sometimes he helped Sophie with her physical therapy exercises, using knowledge from his specialized classes. Other times, they'd just talk about music or movies or books. Elaine would join them for dinner, asking James about his classes and sharing stories from her company. James's mother's health improved with proper care. The Winter Foundation had arranged for her to see specialists she could never have afforded before. The worry lines on her face softened, and she started volunteering at a local community center, teaching knitting classes to neighborhood kids. "You look happy," she told James one evening as they ate dinner in their small apartment, the same one they'd always had, though James could have afforded better now. He had insisted on keeping things simple, saving the extra money for after graduation. "I am happy," he replied, surprised at how true it was. The crushing weight of debt and worry had lifted, allowing him to focus on becoming the doctor he'd always wanted to be. At school, James chose to specialize in neurology with a focus on mobility disorders. His professors noted how easily he connected with patients during clinical rotations, especially those with conditions similar to Sophie's. "Most students see the disability first," his advisor commented after watching James work with a young patient. "You see the person first. That can't be taught." On campus, word spread about the Winter Foundation scholarship. Other students began to apply. What had started as a single opportunity for James expanded into a program supporting dozens of promising medical students dedicated to improving care for patients with disabilities. James sometimes spotted Elaine at the medical school, meeting with the dean or speaking with scholarship candidates. She'd wave to him across the courtyard, but never interrupted his studies or drew attention to their connection. She understood his need to succeed on his own merits. Sophie, now in high school, had become more independent. With technology from her mother's company and her own determination, she was thriving. She'd started a blog about accessibility issues that was gaining followers, and she'd been accepted into advanced science classes. But she still saved time for their Sunday visits. "When you graduate, will you still come over?" she asked James one Sunday as they sat in the park near her building. "Just try to keep me away," he promised. The day James graduated with honors, it rained, a soft spring shower that made the campus grass gleam. As he walked across the stage to receive his diploma, he spotted them in the front row, his mother dabbing at tears, Elaine nodding proudly, and Sophie beaming and waving a small flag she'd made with Dr. James written on it. Later, at the small celebration dinner Elaine had arranged, Sophie raised her glass of sparkling cider for a toast. "To James," she said, her voice strong and clear, "who never saw what I couldn't do, only what I could." James looked around the table at these people who had become his second family, and he knew that the moment Elaine had watched him help Sophie eat had changed not just his life, but all of theirs. 5 years after that life-changing dinner at Celestine's, a crowd gathered outside a gleaming new building. The morning sun bounced off its glass walls, making the whole structure shine like it was made of light. A large sign read Winter Neurological Center in blue letters, with smaller words underneath, "Dignity Through Care." Dr. James Parker stood near the entrance, tugging at his tie. He'd worn suits plenty of times for medical conferences and meetings, but today felt different. Today, the dream he hadn't even dared to imagine was becoming real. "Nervous?" asked Dr. Thompson, an older doctor who had been James's mentor during his residency. Terrified, James admitted with a laugh, "What if I mess up the speech?" "You won't," said a voice behind him. Sophie Winters rolled up in her wheelchair, now a confident college student of 20. Her hair was cut in a stylish bob, and she wore a blazer over her dress. "And even if you do, nobody will care. They're all here for the free food anyway." James grinned. Sophie's straightforward humor had always been one of his favorite things about her. The new medical center had been in the works for 2 years. After finishing his residency, James had approached Elaine with an idea. A facility that would combine cutting-edge treatment with a completely new approach to patient care. Every aspect of the building had been designed with input from people with disabilities, including Sophie, who had contributed ideas during her breaks from studying bioengineering at the State University. The waiting areas had space for wheelchairs, of course, but also sensory-friendly quiet zones for patients who found noise overwhelming. The examination rooms had adjustable height tables that patients could transfer to without help if they wanted. Even the paperwork was different, developed by psychologists to ask questions in ways that respected patients' intelligence and autonomy. People began taking their seats for the opening ceremony. James spotted his mother in the front row, sitting beside Elaine. They were deep in conversation, these two women from completely different worlds who had somehow become friends. His mother now worked full-time at the Winter Foundation, coordinating support for families of scholarship recipients. Mayor Rivera arrived with her entourage, shaking hands and posing for pictures. Local news crews set up their cameras. This was a big deal for the city. The center would serve thousands of patients and create over 100 jobs. "It's time," Elaine said, appearing at James's elbow. At 50, she looked much the same as when they'd first met, except for a few strands of silver in her dark hair. "Aren't you ready?" James nodded. Together, they walked to the podium that had been set up in front of the building's entrance. Sophie rolled alongside them, taking her place in the front of the small stage. As Elaine began her opening speech, James looked out at the crowd. He saw former classmates who now worked at the center, patients he'd treated during his residency who had come to support him, and reporters taking notes. In the back, wearing his familiar black vest, stood Mr. Chen from Celestine's, who had closed the restaurant for the morning so the staff could attend. "And now," Elaine was saying, I'd like to introduce the man whose vision made this center possible, our chief neurologist, Dr. James Parker. The crowd applauded as James stepped forward. His prepared speech sat folded in his pocket, but he left it there. 5 years ago, he began, I was working as a waiter, trying to make enough money to help my sick mother while watching my dreams of becoming a doctor slip away. He paused, looking at Elaine. Then one evening, I met a young woman who changed my life, though I didn't know it at the time. Sophie smiled up at him, giving him a thumbs up. Sometimes people ask me how I specialize in treating patients with neurological disorders without burning out or getting discouraged, James continued. The truth is, I learned the most important lesson before I ever went back to medical school. I learned it that night at the restaurant when I saw not a condition to be managed, but a bright, funny person who happened to need a little help cutting her food. He looked out at the crowd again, at all these people who had become part of his journey. What we're opening today isn't just a medical center. It's a promise. A promise that everyone who comes through these doors will be seen, truly seen, as a whole person first. Because that's where healing really begins.